The Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. We're talking business and building a culture that's kick-ass. Where we make it happen, grab your seat, let's have a blast. At the Entrepreneurial Journey podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. Today I have Issy Warrack with me. Hi Issy, how are you?
Hi, great. Thank you very much. Lovely to talk to you.
And to you too. And for a bonus today, I also have Estrelita van Rensburg. Hello, Estrelita. How are you?
Hi, Rebecca. I'm fine. Thank you. Looking forward to our chat.
Good, wonderful. Now, together you have co-founded a company called Wellness EQ. What do you do? Tell me about that first off.
Why don't you run with that first?
Well, Wellness EQ is really came into being because we really want to help people. In today's world, we know that there are just so many chronic diseases that appear. And people normally think that as we get older, it's inevitable that we're going to suffer from one or more of these chronic diseases: weight gain, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, and so on. And, I think in general, we bring a message of hope because it doesn't need to be like that. There's actually very simple explanation for why it happens and what we can do to minimize the possibility of that happening to us, or if we're already sick, what we can do to actually improve our health. So I think just in a nutshell, that's our ultimate aim.
Okay, good. Well, nice aim to have without a shadow of doubt, and much needed indeed. So you two come from very different backgrounds. Issy, I've kind of known of you in the Scottish ecosystem. How did you two meet?
We actually met at a networking event. A mutual friend introduced us at a networking event. We got on. It was good news. And we discovered that we had a mutual interest in well-being, and not necessarily at that time nutrition, but a mutual interest in well-being and, matters of health. I think that was perhaps the common ground at the very beginning.
Okay. And where did the idea for Wellness EQ come from?
I'll hand over to Estrelita for that one, I think.
I think when we met a few years ago, I think we were both kind of at crossroads. I just left a job in the pharmaceutical industry, a very stressful job, and for myself, I needed to think which direction I wanted to take. Am I going to go back into that kind of environment? But I was also feeling that my own health and that of many family and friends around me was starting to deteriorate. And it kind of gave me pause to think about things a bit more. When we're in a high-flying job, we really don't get time for ourselves and to reflect on what's going on. And I think that gave me the chance to really start thinking more from a medical perspective about prevention, because medical doctors are just taught how to diagnose illness and then how to prescribe medication, but not really very good at prevention, and certainly nothing about nutrition, because it's just not a very important subject for medical students. I mean, it's amazing to actually think about it. So personally, I wasn't up to that stage really very interested in nutrition. I thought I'll just read a little bit about it and then move on to something more exciting. But what I discovered when I started researching the topic was about the amount of misinformation that's out there, and that we all believe, and that we as medical students and doctors are still taught today, are really not based on scientific facts. And there's much more going on in the background. So when I discovered this, I was initially upset, and then I thought, Well, I think it's worth pursuing, first of all, making changes for ourselves. And at that time, both Izzy and I were discussing these things, and she can tell you a little bit more about her story. And we thought, let's give it a go. Let's see if, what is really based on scientific fact, as I could research it, actually works. And
Okay.
we did that for ourselves. And after a period of, actually within weeks, but let's say 3 months, the changes were absolutely amazing. And we thought, this is too good just to keep to ourselves. We need to do something. And that's how Wellness EQ came into being, and thought, let's put something together so that we can help teach and other people can learn from our experience. And actually, as we discovered, there are many people in the world doing something similar to what we're doing with equally great results.
Okay.
And so that's really how it all started for me.
I'm fascinated, and I'm going to come back to that. But Izzy, let's hear your story then first.
Okay, I mean, in general, I was interested in nutrition. I was particularly interested in my own health. Before we even met, I'd had sort of a couple of events, both of which required me to be blue lighted to A&E. I was given a cocktail of medication to deal with my high blood pressure. And really, to be honest with you, the cocktail of medication made me feel worse than actually the high blood pressure. And I rather assumed actually that I was going to be on these high blood pressure tablets forever. If we could fast forward a few years and I was still taking the blood pressure tablets, although there had never really been any identification as to why I'd collapsed these times and lost consciousness.
Gosh.
If we fast forward, events started to happen again. And I had 2 major falls. One resulted in an ankle fracture, the other in a shoulder injury with a fracture as well. And I had no explanation for these falls, none. They just happened. Now, these things don't just happen. You either usually trip or something. But to me, I'd just be walking down the street, and then the next thing I knew, I was sprawling on my face, having hit my shoulder. So there had to be some reason, but nobody seemed to know what the reason was, and we just carried on. But that then led to another event, which was heart palpitations, which were petrifying.
Yeah.
Absolutely petrifying. And one year, just before Christmas, I went to the surgery on an emergency appointment, and it was less than satisfactory, the outcome. And, to be honest with you, I felt even worse once I'd been there, because there didn't seem to be any reason for these palpitations. Of course, there was a reason. And I asked to be referred to a cardiologist, which eventually happened. And he said, the best thing I think we can do for you is actually put in a continuous cardiac monitor. So I had one of those inserted, just a tiny little gadget underneath your skin subcutaneously. And that gave us the answer. Oh. The answer was equally petrifying. The answer was that actually my heart it stopped beating. Oh. So basically what had happened, I used to faint on planes. I would pass out. I would wake up several minutes later, completely unaware of where I was. But anyway, it stopped beating. This was the reason that actually I kept falling over. My heart stopped beating. Right. Okay. So what do you do about that? Well, It was at that point in time that Estrelita said to me, she said, because she'd been studying nutrition intensively, her background is research, and she said to me, I think you should change your diet.
Okay. Wow. It's kind of the one organ you want to keep functioning at all times is your heart, really, isn't it?
Honestly, it was a petrifying experience, but I wouldn't wish it on anyone else. But I actually got to the point of thinking, is this it?
Yeah.
I know that some people think that in older age, or if you're a grandmother, that you should actually be taking things easier. But I did think, is this it? I had no energy. I could hardly get up the stairs sometimes. I just didn't feel like it. or actually, I'd be puffing so much by the time I got to the top, and I just had absolutely no energy, and so
Goodness.
that's how it all started, really.
Well, thank goodness you're here.
Yeah, me too. I think that too, actually.
Well done for still being here. That's great. So you got to the root of it, and it came down to nutrition. So, I mean, Issy, I have met you sort of from a distance in the past. You don't strike me, or you didn't strike me as somebody who was particularly unhealthy. So, what was going on with your nutrition that was causing this to happen?
Okay, we probably have to reel back a few years to find advice given on nutrition to
Okay.
myself. One was to eat a more plant-based diet with stronger emphasis on vegetables, etc. But the other aspect, which was critical for me, I didn't realize it, was actually to eat low-fat products. 20 years of that advice produced the symptoms that I had. So it was really, and to be honest with you, people were just doing their best at that particular point in time. That was the belief. It still actually is the belief. And so I don't blame those people. It's just an event that happened where, really, if I'd actually continued to eat as I was eating before, they may not have happened.
Right.
They may not have happened.
So what do the low fat products do that are causing that caused that damage in you? What happens there?
Okay, can I maybe actually pass that for Estrelita to answer about what's actually in the low-fat products? I think she will give a better explanation than mine.
Okay, go for it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, nutrition, let's start talking about the fat, because, we were all made to believe from the 1980s, really. And I remember as a medical student, don't eat eggs, don't eat butter, all those things about fat and cholesterol and so on. And that's really, I think, at the heart of the misinformation. And that really started after the Second World War, when there was a surge of heart disease and heart attacks. And nobody really thought, what's going on here? Because if we think back in those times, most people smoked, during the Second World War and afterwards. And there's a very, very clear link between smoking, for instance, and heart disease. It's not the only link, but it's very strong. That was completely overlooked. And they wanted to find something else to blame. And that is when, in the early 50s, this notion of fat and cholesterol causes heart disease started to, it started in America, and it was very powerful researchers that promoted that. It wasn't so much here in the UK, because here in the UK, the main culprit was identified by Professor John Yatkin from London as being sugar. But that's a discussion on its own. In any case, the drive coming from America was so strong that in the late 70s, beginning 80s, even the American government became interested in nutrition during the Nixon administration, and they really wanted to improve the health of Americans. So they put a committee together to advise the government on what's good eating. And they were people, it wasn't really a scientific group. There was a vegetarian person leading the group, and there were a lot of conflicts going on of interest at the time. In any case, it was decided by, it's really scary to think about it, a committee making recommendations to the US Senate of what is a healthy diet. And they all decided people need to eat less fat.
Right.
Because it's linked to heart disease, unproven at that stage, and people need then to eat more carbohydrates. So a more vegetable, vegetarian, plant-based diet. So it already started then. that was then formulated into the MyPlate, the US dietary guidelines for the population. And that was adopted in 1983 here in the UK. And we have it as the Eat Well Guide. We can also call it the Eat Badly Guide, but you can go onto the NHS website and so on, and you find the guide there. And if you analyze what they tell you to eat, I mean, it's actually amazing. There's even junk food on that plate. It's a very high carbohydrate diet with very little fat. So people had to reduce their fat intake, and protein, especially red meat, started being labeled as something that's bad and cause cancer. Once again, no scientific evidence for that. That's all done by association studies, which really doesn't mean anything in proper scientific, protocols. So that's what we were stuck with. And the populations in the US, here in the UK, and then slowly globally started adopting this so-called new Western diet, meaning low fat, low animal protein, and high carbohydrate content. What happened, and one can clearly look at epidemiological data, because we have that for all the chronic diseases like obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, heart disease, progressively over the next decades, increase and increase. Up to today, where we really have epidemics, if we think about just type 2 diabetes, often when I speak to people and ask them, look, what is the kind of disease that you're most afraid of, as you get older? And very often people would say dementia. Right. It's not something, it's terrifying to think that you lose your mind and nobody knows what to do about it. But people don't understand that these diseases that I've just mentioned are really dietary diseases based on an incorrect diet. And we understand what is the physiological or the metabolic abnormality that happens in our body that cause these diseases. But it's not spoken about and it's not promoted. And that actually is a completely different topic that we can also discuss a little bit. But there's a lot of, let me just put it this way, industry interest in promoting processed food items, drink items, as well as obviously from the pharma industry for having medications that can treat these chronic diseases. I'll just take a pause. It's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, no, so I'm a huge fan of the Joe Rogan podcast, and he gets into nutrition. He's had various nutritionists on. One of the things that I learned was that the scientists in the 50s were paid $47,000 to say that fats were the harmful bit so that the sugar lobby could get away scot-free. And I only learned that recently, and I've known for a while that the sugars have been really not great for us and have been at the heart of a lot of obesity. To hear it from you as well. So why? Okay, we have a huge, you're right, epidemic of obesity in the Western world. You look around. When I was at school in the 70s, there was usually one kid in the class that was overweight. Everybody else was within a healthy range. And it's now not the case. There are more and more people who are in a very unhealthy range of weight. And it's clearly because of what they're putting into their bodies, with a few exceptions, but clearly mainly what they're putting into their bodies. So why isn't the government helping people understand what to eat properly?
Well, maybe, it's a little bit more of a cynical answer, but, if you're in government, you're running a country, you need a lot of money to keep the country going. There is some tax benefits from having big companies, provide their products in your country. We know that there's already been an initiative to tax the sugar tax that we know of a few years ago. Now, I know the government has also more recently retreated again on that because there's huge pressure from the food and drinks industry. Because if you go to the supermarket, just think of all the aisles. 90% of the aisles are packed with processed food and drink items. If you think of the fresh fruit and veg and fresh food section, it's tiny. That is the real food that we as humans, through evolution, have been designed to eat. Yet, and I mean, when I go to the supermarket, I just look at what people buy. What's in there, what do they pay for at the till, and my heart sinks because it's a high carbohydrate, sugary, processed food items packed with vegetable and seed oils. Those are the unnatural fats. That's highly inflammatory. And I know what's going to happen to that family. And, children are being exposed now to high sugar food items, even as babies. So we don't only now see obesity in adults or at midlife, we see it in teenagers and young adults. And they also become insulin resistant because that's the metabolic term for what happens in the body being exposed to the high load of processed food and drinks.
Yeah. So we recently, and again on the back of a Joe Rogan podcast, I recently banned processed seed oils from the house, and we stick to olive oil now and butter and fish, meat, eggs, veg. That's it. The closest we get to process is a tin of tomatoes now. So,
Rebecca, it's interesting that you mentioned tomatoes because I always thought, well, the tomatoes, there can't be anything wrong with it. But do yourself a favor next time you buy a tin of tomatoes, turn it around, look at the back. And what you will see is that there's added sugar to that tin of tomatoes. So, yeah, I mean, I was surprised as well. So I almost challenge people to find anything that they buy in a tin or in a packet that hasn't got added carbs and sugars to it.
I'm going to check my tins of tomatoes. Thank you very much for that top tip. Right, what are you doing that's positive? So what can we do, and how are you helping people? I know you've got some programs running and workshops. So how can we join in and get healthier?
Well, it's a great question. We are encouraging people. Thank you for asking the question, because we are encouraging people to take control for themselves. The way that I found that I could actually control my own health was actually to say, okay, I'm actually going to control what I eat, And so like I just eat fresh protein, veggies, some berries, little fruit, and loads of yogurt and cream and things like that, which have really helped. I had brain fog before. I didn't even know I had brain fog until it disappeared. So, I really improved my diet. But what people find is actually, because there's so much information out there, they don't know what to do, which is why we set up a 12-week optimizer plan. It's Optimizer Health, which will help people's metabolic health. It's a guided step-by-step process which takes people through the journey, which at the end of 12 weeks will actually lead them to a much healthier life, especially if they follow it. I follow this type of program now for life. I have never had more energy than I have now. I'm a grandmother. I was expecting actually to retire 2 or 3 years ago, but I'm so fascinated and impassioned by this that I'm carrying on. We also have other aspects which help people. Estrelita does individual one-to-one consultations. I should have said actually around the health program we have, the 12-week health program, it's actually based on our book, the knowledge that's in our book, Eat Well or Die Slowly. But we do find that people need a guided program to assist them. And we can either do it individually or in groups, or we also actually do workplace wellbeing groups as well. Apart from that, we also have a metabolic health assessment. I might pass over to Estrelita just to explain exactly what that means in a medical sense, but it's absolutely revealing as to how your current state of health is. Can I just pass over to you?
Yeah, go for it. I'll put the links to the book and your website onto the podcast so people can contact them. Before we come back to you, Estrelita, I had some advice with regard to my menopause, and the advice was eat more protein and reduce the sugary carbs. And like you, Issy, the brain fog has gone. Mm-hmm. And my energy levels have gone up. So I've now been doing that for about 3 or 4 weeks. It took a couple of weeks to kick in. And what's really fascinating, on Sunday, I had a couple of croissants